What's going on, guys? Had to be here. I know this is kind of a different format than my usual video, but yeah, I wanted to try out a few different things, and I thought this might be a half decent video to try it on, but I also apologize in advance because I'm not really sure how well I'm going to be able to format the video in a way, just because the footage I would like to show kind of technically doesn't exist for many of this stuff I'm going to talk about, but that's beside the point. Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker has been out now for a while, and I've been pretty much drawn in. This expansion finally concludes the Ascian storyline presented over 10 years ago. Absolutely wild to think that this game could maintain and even surpass expectations, especially considering the infamous 1.0 launch of the game, which I still have. Like a crazy person. I indeed technically started with 1.0. I just got a brand new laptop on sale and wanted to see what these PC gamer things were all about. I'd mostly only been console based. So I went out to Walmart to see what game I could get and see this little masterpiece. I had just finished 13 and was kind of surprised to see that this was already on the shelf. So I took it home. It was surprised I had to pay for a subscription when I have the disc in my hand, and I didn't put much time into it. Definitely a part of it was I was so heavily born and bred with console gaming that using a keyboard felt like learning to ride a unicycle before learning to even ride a tricycle. So that kind of threw me off for a bit. The other part was it just all felt slow. I can never comment on the shortcomings of the UI or any of the other stuff that made 1.0 so terrible to most MMO fans, but I guess it just wasn't my time for the game. This era was not very long. Jump forward a couple years, again at Walmart, I catch this bad boy. I'm more in tune with my appreciation of video games, so I at least remembered that this was an MMO, but was curious to see how it would work on controller. Long story short, it works, but you really need to put in the extra effort to make it work proper, especially for your own preferences. There are so many settings and submenus, actions and buttons to assign those buttons to, and different ways to shortcut your controls to allow for easier access to the wide array of moves. Though that last part is really only a problem the deeper into the expansions that you go. Because of these feelings, trying to be a healer in an MMO, especially with Final Fantasy XIV, was almost out of the question at the time. Needing to have quick reactions to spot, click, and heal party members is made significantly easier with a mouse and keyboard, that which I wasn't really sure how to set up on a PlayStation 4. Chatting is also almost out of the question on controller since the pop-up keyboard is way too slow for messaging at the expected speeds. With all that said, to mitigate most of those problems, I just went into A Realm Reborn as a one-trick male Hure, or human, bard that just never talked. But that was not the only reason. One of my all-time favorite superheroes is this lovely man right here, Hawkeye. So, yeah, I wanted to do some cool shit with a bow. And I also got to passively help my team with songs that filled people's gauges, so that was nice, while also adhering to some basic combat loops. A Realm Reborn Bard was actually a perfect starting job if you've never played an MMO before. The original system was slightly flawed though. For A Realm Reborn jobs, you started out as a basic class first before attaining the job everyone knows. But you would also have to level up a specific secondary job in order to unlock the main job you wanted. For Bard, its secondary job was Monk. I only needed to level it up to 15, but without being able to queue for anything interesting, it was such a bore. I also mostly handicapped myself as well by not playing other jobs because each job had a cross-class skill that you can unlock to give to other jobs. And some of these were damn near essential, and yet I never bothered with them, but I didn't care. I had a month to get the most out of this game as I could due to the free trial, and not really having a reliable means of buying stuff online, i.e. a membership. And my goal? To get that dope-ass bard armor from the opening movie and that wicked bow. Oof. The armor came easy enough. You got it through doing the main quests for the job. The bow was a bit of a different story. You needed to acquire a certain other bow, whether you bought it or made it yourself, then place in materia into its materia slot. Materia in this universe acts like general stat boost. The problem? I never did any of the Disciple of Hand jobs, carpentry in this case, to make the bow. I also hadn't done any botany as well in order to acquire the materials, and in a social capacity, I wasn't sure how to go about using like the market board or to enlist the aid of someone else. A mixture being antisocial and unfamiliar with how the social systems in a typical PC space are done. So my solution? Start up carpentry level 1, buy some basic materials off the board once I figured it out, and did leaves upon leaves, at least the ones I knew I could do at a high quality. Crafting items isn't simply click and make, you have to actively work on an item, raising its quality through various means, then progressing the final product in a set amount of moves. Luck does play a small factor by sometimes changing the condition of the item to allow for a boosted amount done to the item. I mention the process now because besides new skills added within each expansion to spice up the routine, it's remained largely unchanged. Anyways, I used leaves as my main experience source for this, and after a few levels, I found I could comfortably make these logs at high quality, which earns you extra experience without much effort. I just have to accept the leave in New Gridania, then run to Bent Branch Meadows to deliver it, then repeat. All the way to level 50. Ugh, it was gruesome. Technically, I didn't need to get to 50 to make the bow, I could have made it sooner, but the bow had to be high quality, and I just wanted to be sure I could achieve the mark without wasting the materials, since they would be expensive to get. But I did it, on my own. It was rough, but now I got my bard armor and bow, and the trailer definitely made the female Mikote, the cat person, look awesome with the getup, but a generic human male? Not so much. Picked here since at the time, creating characters in video games to replicate me to the best of my ability was how I usually handled custom characters. But if there's ever something that personally irks me, even though I'm sure most people don't really care about it, I'm petty when it comes to character design, so I would rather have my character look cool over anything else, especially in my video games. Thankfully, there's a glamour system to make your armor look cool without sacrificing stats. Armor and clothing in Final Fantasy XIV just don't look great on male characters. It's either passable or just off. But on females, they generally look really good, no matter the style. On top of that, at this point of play, I'm finally learning about the micromanaging stats and armors, and early on, picking a specific race does give you a small boost in specific stats. Nowadays, I don't think the numbers are still really applied, and even if they are, I feel like it's mostly just negligible. So at the end of the Realm Reborn main series quests, you're gifted an exclusive item called Fantasia, something normally only bought with real-world money that allows you to change your character's race and other tiny features not normally done in-game. So I did, to a female Mikote, since they get a boost in their dexterity, a bard's main stat, and the armor would actually look good on her. Now that we're at the point in time that it's a Realm Reborn's endgame, I feel like it's important to note the learning curve experienced throughout. Many of the mechanics haven't really been taught to the player very well at the start. There's no mentor program or that learning guild thing that's there now. No sprout icon for all those newbies that were going on, at least I don't think. So many of the things that feel basic for an MMO have mostly had to have been learned through experience for me. The catch? Many of these things were learned while in the presence of others, and early on, no offense, kind of, to the majority of the community now, but players were not beginner friendly to new people. I tried tanking early on and wasn't grabbing enemies properly, that was a problem. Not knowing how mechanics work with the bosses right away tends to ruffle people's feathers. Someone typed into Limit Break a boss while I was playing as Bard. I hadn't done an LB before, so I thought, yeah, neat, why not? But limit breaking for Bard in the Realm Reborn acted more like a healer's LB, which all it did was just heal people. And did the chat ever get pissy after that? What can I do? You told me to LB. All that early on really made me nervous to proceed further, at least not without knowing what to do. So every single dungeon or boss encounter, I made sure to watch some videos on it to familiarize myself on what I needed to do so I don't disappoint anyone else to the best of my ability. My antisocial nature leads to a little bit of anxiety when it comes to stuff like this, so making sure people I have to interact with are happy makes things easier to stomach. Helps especially with experiencing the endgame content. Fighting through the main series quests, you have to participate in special boss fights with specific party layouts. These are mostly done to be more of a spectacle than anything, but then you unlock harder difficulties at max level to try these fights at a proper level of challenge. Special mechanics that have unique requirements, strict damaging thresholds, sharing tanking responsibilities, they are pretty neat. But everyone's level of learning or commitment to learn differ greatly from each other, and people's tolerance to beginners, like I said earlier, was pretty bad at this stage of the game's existence. So it took me a while to get through many of these extreme fights due to my own level of skill and others' lack of being taught or refusing to learn mechanics. It feels like I'm really talking down to the whole experience, but I still put in a butt ton of time. Part of it was simply I paid for the subscription, so I might as well get the most out of it. But when the experience was fun, when you do get a good group of players together to finally overcome a really tough fight, that camaraderie and success was intoxicating fun. And despite all of that, I almost completely quit Final Fantasy XIV. Long story really short, the account that I made for 1.0 and A Realm Reborn somehow shared information despite being different, and when I wanted to take a break, I still kept being subscribed with many issues getting it resolved, bleeding money for no reason the whole time. Really frustrating, and I ended up deleting my character in the last-ditch effort to try and keep the company from taking more money from me when I wasn't playing the game. It wasn't for another year and a half that I attempted to go back and try Final Fantasy XIV. I did try to sell my copy to GameStop beforehand, but was told literally I would only get $2 for it, which was outrageous. The guy working there, though, tried to buy it for me personally, saying that a physical PS4 copy is pretty rare, but only offered $10, so I kept it. For $10, I might as well just keep it. And to that end, I decided to give it another go. Fortunately, whatever character I deleted wasn't the one that I put all my work into, so that was nice. And at that time was when Heavensward was the most current expansion. But before we proceed, I just wanted to highlight my favorite and least favorite instances within each expansion. So, for my favorite, Shiva, easy. The fight's entertaining and was the funnest to actually learn on Savage. And that beat drop transition into her second phase after Diamond Dust, mwah, great. Least favorite, well, kind of cheating already, will probably have to go to a combined Sestasha, Tamtara Deepcroft, Copperbell Mines, Halatali, and 1000 Maws of Total Rock. A little unfair, I know, to group them together, but it feels like up until Hawk Manor, the dungeons never really felt that interesting, and the jobs are all extremely basic to the point of feeling monotonous to go through. Rolling these when trying to do random duty roulettes hurts my soul. So next up, Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward. That story transition going to the expansion was crazy, and I loved it. It also introduced 3 new jobs to the plethora of roles already introduced. As well, it introduced one of my favorite city-states in Ishgard. That theme is so good, and that pure spectacle of the place is awe-inspiring. Also introduced is flying mounts. Early on in A Realm Reborn, you can raise a chocobo companion to follow you around in the overworld, acting as a sidekick to assist in battles with random enemies or when partaking in special events called fates. You're also able to ride the chocobo as well for faster means of travel around the world and zones. But now in Heavensward zones, after collecting all of a zone's special ether currents, you can then ride your chocobo or any special riding mount in the air. Might sound busted, but you can usually only collect the final currents within a zone's final part and after completing main series quests as a reward, so you can't just cheese the whole place immediately. They also introduced a new race in the Aura, dragon-like folk basically. The instance we were introduced to them through the Ninja Yugiri, I knew I wanted to be one. That mentality remains for every new job ever introduced for everyone else ever, as when we got the Bunny Girls and the Lion Men of the Viera and Hrothgar in Shadowbringer, that was all you ever saw walking around. And I think it was probably the same with the Alra, but to me, I've always stuck with this race since its inception, and probably always will, unless they introduce bird people. But for as much as I wanted to make it male, no offense, but the male Alra just don't jive with me. Again, part of it is that female armor looks better, but something about males' faces just look funky. And with that limited customization options, it was hard to make them look good to me. Female though, bam, this is my OC. I don't know why I went with blue hair with white highlights, but I really like this look for her. Now, as I played through this expansion, I tried to continue my one-tricking ways with the Bard, but it, alongside the new ranged job of the Machinist, experienced a shift in how the job performed. If you performed Wanderer's Minuet as Bard, or equipped the Gauss Barrel with Machinist, every weapon skill becomes a casted skill for increased damage, but you couldn't perform auto attacks. I tried my hand at some caster jobs, but they never really clicked back in A Realm Reborn, so now making it part of a Bard's kit kinda felt off. Worse than that was that having it applied at almost all times was damn near meta at the opportune moment, so anyone not using Wanderers or Gauss kinda got some funny looks. But for the most part, I didn't care. I would play how I wanted to. There were other things I had to worry about. Firstly, what I did care about was queue times for getting into dungeons as Bard or just DPS in general. They were starting to get disgustingly long, and on top of that, my inventory was starting to get plugged up, even with both retainers, using my Chocobo saddlebag and my basic inventory, and a lot of it was armors I won in dungeons. So I decided partway through to maybe start working on another job, specifically a tank, so I might be able to skip queue times, and since many of my extra armors were tank gear. I had level Paladin and Warrior up to like 20-ish, I think, mostly to get Flash from Paladin as a cross-class skill, but I decided to go with Heavensward's new tank class, the Dark Knight. Since they start out immediately at level 30, I was able to skip over a lot of the more monotonous grind from 1 to 30. I would very slowly work on other jobs as well, but going forward, I was no more a one-trick Bard, but a two-trick Bard and Dark Knight. Getting into the endgame of Heavensward introduced me to a quest line that would allow me to get these special glowy weapons, and you bet your butt I was gonna do them for that prize. It more or less entailed doing some specific dungeons with certain weapons equipped, and collecting special item drops from fates in each of the new zones that had extremely low drop rates. It was a little time consuming, but nowhere near as bad as doing the fancy bow stuff from A Realm Reborn, and allowed me to also passively work on other jobs levels as well. Outside all that, yeah, Heavensward was sort of a brief stint, not because I didn't enjoy it or it itself was lacking, but compared to some of the later changes, it really didn't change much between expansions. At the time of this expansion, I also didn't do many of the extra bosses and such. It just kind of did what I needed to and moved on. So probably my favorite instance this expansion was probably the Aerie. You got to fight Nidhogg early, and Jaboy and Stinian was also there to assist, which was pretty badass. My least favorite? Well, regular dungeons incorporate teams of 4, and raids groups of 8. There's also special dungeons called Alliance Raids, which has up to 24 people charging in to take on the challenges ahead. Most are pretty fun, even when learning it, but the Weeping City of Mach was, and surprisingly is, still brutal for one reason. These nerds. Obviously knowing what to do is how you get through them, but for whatever reason, their mechanics always throw people off, both new and returning. You can make the argument that it's the people's fault, and it kind of is, just someone needs to take the fall here. Which leads us to Stormblood.
Please welcome our new manager,
the Red Mage!
Yeah! Yeah! Oh, better luck next time, buddy!
Okay, so as of this point in time, I hadn't played too many Final Fantasy games, especially ones with a designated jobs system, but I had played one of Square Enix's other games recently, Bravely Default, And one of my favorite jobs in the game was the good old Red Mage. A jack of all trades and kind of a master at them pretty much. Able to do comfortable physical damage with almost any weapon. Able to strike at enemies' elemental weaknesses. And support your own team by learning almost all types of spells. I loved using the job. And it also had an ability where if it dodges an attack, it also gains an extra BP, letting you attack more per each turn. So taunt skills combined with something like Ninja's dodging abilities means you could do some crazy stuff, and I loved it. But I'm not here to talk about that. As soon as I got into Stormblood, you can bet your butt I ran to Red Mage as soon as possible. Its dual casting ability, coupled with an easy to learn and easy to master gameplay loop, kind of gravitated me towards the job, and has thus attained my new main job title, even to this day. If I remember correctly, they also took out cross-class skills as they used to be, in favor of a set pool of abilities each subcategory of jobs all shared. They did that in order to also make it that you only needed to level up the job you want to use without having to work on a secondary job beside it. That would have been nice to have known before, but anyways. I got the expansion initially for PS4 again, like always, but not long after I started, I finally got a gaming PC, more or less, to play Final Fantasy XIV, to be honest. So, I picked up my third copy of FF14 and went about prepping how I want to play on PC. Many of the jobs that I felt comfortable with controller, I just sort of kept going with controller. It was mostly healers I wanted to try out, and yeah, healer with mouse and keyboard just works, you know? I know people have made it work on controller, and hell, even at present day, I can kind of make it work thanks to some macros, special commands that you can apply to almost anything. But if you want to play healer, I'd recommend a keyboard and mouse. This expansion's big exploration inclusion this go around is underwater traversal. And it's kind of boring. All it is just an extension on flying for the most part, allowing you to submerge in deep water to swim around indefinitely. I really wish they would have tried to incorporate combat into here, but unfortunately it's just movement based or gathering based. I forget how late into the expansion it came, but eventually there was a bit of an adjustment to how combat resources work for jobs. Early on you had 3 bars to worry about for your resources. Your health, obviously, MP, which really only applied to magic caster jobs, and a third resource in TP. TP was more or less the MP for physical jobs, and it was wonky as hell to say the least, but not that bad. Much like casters with MP, melee jobs had means of recovering TP in the sort. The only thing that ever really bugged me, as well as everyone else I think, was the fact that using the sprint action drained your TP entirely, being a damn near death sentence for physical jobs that had to move somewhere fast. Most jobs had some sort of movement based skills, but not in every direction and not always freely anyways. But within Stormblood they finally took out TP entirely, thus making sprint just a normal cooldown button, so that's nice. Now here's where I can finally tackle this topic. I've already mentioned my antisocial ways, but that's not to say I wanted to completely hermit myself away, and one of FF14's biggest social features is free companies, essentially a guild of players of sort. With an FC, you can buy plots of land to build homes, and your group can work together to raise a house all on your own. Your FC leader can also set special bonuses for the free company, like experience gains or cheaper teleportation costs, which is nice. That being said, if I wanted to join a group of people, I wanted to feel like a part of the team. Someone people would uniquely point me out and go, "Hey Hat, how's it going?" But it's hard to get that vibe when most requests to join a group came with some random person I've never interacted with before, with damn near telemarketer levels of basic dialogue to try and recruit me. You can feel the PC macro at work for most of these invites. And then sometimes they would like spam invites over and over and over, and that just got super annoying. Irregardless, I still did want to see what it was like, so I caught a recruiter in one of the city-states and decided, this person says it's a small, chill group of people, maybe that'll work. and thus I tried to join in a conversation that a bunch of people were going on about, got ignored every sentence I wrote, and got declined to join a raid group despite needing more people, and thusly left. Definitely wasn't a small group. The max amount of people in the group said it was something like in the 80s, which is crazy. I know I'm antisocial, but if I'm not going to get answers on basic questions, I'm going to leave. I did eventually join one that kind of stuck. Most of the members were fine, and we even tackled XIV on Savage, which was pretty fun, though we were ultimately unsuccessful. I later joined a party finder group and managed to be an integral member, getting the final kill on him. Now, it was in this expansion that I finally said, screw it. I'll finally level up every job. Nothing was gonna ruin my love for Red Mage, but I needed to clear inventory space again. And only working on one job wasn't gonna help. I needed to get rid of like every job's armor and such. Definitely didn't help that I also hoarded every single random item I came across from enemies in the sword. But I was on like the 4th or 5th retainer now, and after 2 you have to pay for these retainers to hold on to your items with real world money, and that's rough. Doing the grind for the jobs would lead me to enjoying Scholar or Summoner a little bit, and actually severely enjoying Dragoon quite a bit. I was actually really happy with the job, and it quickly rose in my ranking of favorites. Leveling all of these would also show me just how much responsibilities are laid upon healers and tanks. I never did high-end content with healers, but I tried some stuff with tanks, and there's extra stuff you need to watch out for. Bless all you tanky boys and girls. The final thing to slightly mention is Eureka. This was a separate leveling zone independent of the regular leveling process, which had you exploring special regions, killing mobs to chain together bonuses, all the while using a mana wheel of sorts to apply offensive and defensive boosts against enemies of a certain element type. Dying in Eureka will also deduct experience from you, so you need to be extra careful here. I never utilized it much during its most current patches. I think I ducked in once to see what it was like and kind of got bored of the experience process and left. But the special armor set specific to each job needed this place in order to get a variant that can be dyed with a color of your choosing. The Red Mage's first hat they get is my absolute favorite, and I managed to get lucky with some gear looking kinda close to its OG color, but as my glams got more elaborate, my hat's color started to clash, so I actually took some time out a couple weeks ago to upgrade my hat finally, alongside my Red Mage weapon, since it too had been the same from the start. Still haven't done all of Eureka, but what you do in the first zone is essentially the same as the others, just with different rewards. But irregardless, that's all I can comfortably say about this expansion. By the end, I had everything maxed out except for Monk, because boo. My own endgame of sorts, I suppose, to get every job maxed out. My favorite instance here, although I died a lot in it, is probably XIV Savage. Goddamn, that song change in the second phase is wicked, and the fight's kinda fun without feeling too bullshitty, I guess? Least favorite, I feel like people would immediately point to the Ritterana Lighthouse, because the math boss makes people sweat. But I really like the fight, and fighting Yzmat is always a treat. Nah, I'm gonna have to go, honestly, with Bardam's Medal, the level 65 dungeon. I get the point of it, to prove yourself, but like, the first fight is just against a bunch of farm animals, and the Yol fight at the end is underwhelming, and the second encounter isn't even a fight, it's just Simon Says, and a boring one at that. The novelty wore off the first time I did it, and I've always hated getting this on roulette. Alright, almost there. We have Shadowbringers, the first expansion I pre-ordered. The first thing to note right away, I'm usually really active upon a new patch's first release, with the total amount of time I put in varying depending on how much there really is to do for that patch. I usually break off for a while after my subscription has ended to work on my normal backlog of games, then rejoin again once a patch is new and fresh. Coming back to Shadowbringers, I checked in on the free company I was with, and everyone was gone for like a long ass amount of time. So long that I had somehow taken over the role of the free company leader for a group of literally no one. For a fresh expansion, brand new, and to have no one join back in, nah, I left. Better to be alone than to be alone and a leader of a group of ghosts. Which was fine. Game tried to help by introducing the trust system. There was a small semblance of this feature already in the game, but with trusts, all the main characters within the main story could join you in dungeons for a single player experience. I like this sentiment, but if you're looking for a more efficient playthrough of these dungeons, queuing with people is always going to be better. And you'll have to anyway, since raids can't be done with trust in this expansion anyway. And aside from that, honestly, I think that's more or less all I got for here, at least not without talking about the plot. I'll get there soonish. A new tank class and gunbreaker was introduced, and I really enjoyed that job, so I incorporated that into my list of favorites. Because I left the free company, and because I felt hesitant to join another due to the outcome of that last one, I didn't join another, which led me to not doing much of the Savage content this go around. The crossover with Yoko Taro's Nier Automata series was kinda neat too. Something they did sort of introduce here was that Fate's now awarded special currency that can now be used to buy zone-specific enemy drops, which is a godsend when plotting out stuff for crafters, since item drops do feel a little inconsistent. And then there's the Bozja Southern Fronts, which sort of acts as a successor to Eureka, but with the ability to equip special skills that can augment your class. Play as a tank that can heal, a healer that can pump out lots of damage, or a samurai that can tank. It's a little more interesting than Eureka, but again, I didn't spend too much time with it either. An immediate winner that comes to mind for favorite instance would probably have to go to the Twinning, simply for that awesome song. The song's way too good. As for bad, nothing really springs to mind, at least not without considering Savage stuff I really haven't done. I definitely heard some horror stories on Light Rampant from Progs from Shiva, but ignoring that, I never really had much of an issue with this expansion's content. Alright people, finally. Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker, our most current expansion at the time of this video, and whoo boy, this thing's been 10 plus years in the making. Again, nothing major jumps out in terms of mechanical improvements. I will say that job updates and tweaks from over the years have sort of been steering towards eliminating positionals. All melee DPS jobs have moves that, when hit on a specific part of an enemy, will have added benefits, either with bonus damage or rewarding extra points to a job-specific resource. With Endwalker, most have been severely nerfed in terms of requiring their need to use them. Now, a part of me is relieved. Positionals are almost the sole reason I despise jobs like Monk so much, and have made things like Ninja and Samurai a little easier to gain their meters. On the other hand, I know there are some people that like Monk, and its soul-defining gameplay feature has basically been taken away from it to make it like a toddler version of what it was. Positionals also sort of felt rewarding to accomplish, actually made the gameplay somewhat of a challenge, instead of just focusing doing your basic combos, then spending every special move during your burst. That being said, I do think there's two big reasons for the heavy change on positionals. People were whining about their uptime when bosses couldn't be hit normally, and the other, I think Square Enix wants to try and make more elaborate boss mechanics, and that may require players to be in disadvantageous positions to strike the boss. Thus, why they had a regular boss in one of the new raids to not require positions. But that's all beside the point, it's pure speculation. Sage was introduced as the new healer, and although I was mixed on its initial reveal, it quickly became my favorite healer after playing around with it. But the real reason many of us play this game, the reason why we were so invested with the series for this long, is the story. So, I've been sort of flip-flopping on how I want to represent my thoughts and analysis on the plot of this game, because I'm probably gonna butcher the story to just pure lore junkies. It's a little hard to explain, but it's like this. I need to watch a movie a good 2 or 3 times at least before I can comfortably remember how it mostly went. I can understand the gist of what happens, maybe even remember a scene or two, but I'm usually pretty bad at catching everything, let alone retaining what I did catch on to without multiple viewings. Video games are a little different, since I'm the one in control, at worst being this omniscient presence to my player character, and at best, living vicariously through them as it's my experience. I tend to be more involved in that case. That being said, Final Fantasy XIV has the unique problem of having such long stretches of time without general lore updates and reminders. I think there is some sort of compendium you can read, and I believe late into Stormblood they did introduce New Game Plus, which allows you to go back and play through the story from certain expansions, aiding in that, but I mean, I don't got time for that. So between long periods of plot updates, coupled with the over 10 years of lore having been built up, and having the inability to watch cutscenes when grouped with people, because God forbid you want to take the time to learn about the place in the moment, my advanced knowledge is lacking. But I will sort of try my best to talk about it to the best of my ability, based off what I can readily remember. A Realm Reborn. Pretty basic most of the way through, having a generic empire of sorts trying to take over everything in the name of equality, and primitive beast tribes worshipping so hard they're manifesting their gods in real life. Also mysterious people in trench coats with like bigger plans in mind, though definitely nothing set in stone since it's still really early. All the while joining up with a group of people just like you called the Scion of the Seventh Dawn. Yet you're the only one who can seemingly accomplish anything of worth. Like I said though, that transition sequence with the banquet and the assassination of the Queen-ish of Ul'dah was crazy, and was the highlight of the expansion. Heaven's Word. Estinian's an awesome character. Sorry I had to get that out of the way first. There was a change in voice acting going into Realm Reborn to Heaven's Word, which was kind of fun to realize as I played through the finale of A Realm Reborn and straight into the opening of Heaven's Word in the same play session. I do like the new / current voice cast a little bit better though. But looking back in hindsight, the general Heaven's Word plot sort of feels detached from the rest of this world's story. Not to say that the Dragon Song War was a bad plot, it's neat seeing the lengths everyone and everything has to go through in order to finally come together in harmony. And it's this expansion that really makes Estinian the way he is, so without it, I may not have one of my favorites. Although we do lose one of the crew, which feels like it should have been super heart-wrenching, it definitely didn't quite hit me as hard as Nanamo's death, though. Stormblood. For all intents and purposes, this sort of feels like a soft finale to the Save Eorzea plotline. You run through the resistance of Alamigo that was previously under Empire rule, and alongside the repressed people of Kugane and their surrounding regions, are able to send Garlemald back to their homeland, but not without pissing off Xenos Ye Galvus, and sort of killing him, but not really? Regardless. I hate that they took away Lise from the main crew. I get why, as her power standing compared to the rest of the Scions technically doesn't match up, but she was a fun character that, like Estinian, went through some neat character growth that I want to explore more. The interactions with the Kugane people, Lord Hien, Yugiri, and Gosetsu, against their former repressors turned captives, is kind of a big catalyst for how events in Endwalker kind of play out, and I thought turned out really interesting here too. Too bad some people couldn't stay alive to see where the world would go, but such is the way. Shadowbringer. The mere existence of this expansion opens the door to so many possibilities for future plot arcs and locations, it's not even funny. You travel basically through dimensions to a new world where you see the consequences of too much light in this world. It's a world completely detached of the problems you've been dealing with up to this point, save for the odd clue to a much larger conspiracy. It was neat tying in a seemingly tied up plot thread with the Crystal Towers raids from A Realm Reborn by bringing back the main character of that arc, Grahatia. It's just unfortunate that everyone knew what the big reveal was going to be, since you were forced to complete the Crystal Tower before proceeding into Shadowbringers, making something that was normally a side adventure into a mandatory piece of the quest. And the main villain of this arc, Emmett Selk, had completely cemented himself as a favorite villain / character amongst the community. I wasn't quite sure what to make of him at first, since the previous Ascians have pretty much been straightforward in their cartoonish view to end the world, but Emmett Selk definitely has a lot more to him. At the halfway point of the patches for this expansion, there's a finale to the plotline for this world at least, and are then brought back to the OG world. However, all bits of story introduced here are simply just a setup for Endwalker easily, making it probably the least interesting interlude of all the expansions. Which finally leads us back to where we started. Endwalker does an interesting thing with its story by introducing a vital plot element, then more or less resolving it within the one story arc. Its introduction from a simplistic point of view did sort of feel like it came out of left field. Deep lore junkies have semi-confirmed from Storeblood's Omega raids that was where it was first alluded to, but that's sort of beside the point. The hard finale for the Empire, and even the Ascians as we knew them, ends only a mere couple of levels into this expansion, making way for the new element introduced, resolving that by this patch's end at least. I feel like with most other forms of media, pulling a stunt like that is usually seen as a bad thing, but this new plot thread does oddly explain a lot of the things the player has had to deal with coming up to this point, and it gives concrete objective to aim towards where there almost was none, save for this ambient threat the game keeps commenting on. And the game also cashes in on so many lore bits that have felt almost long abandoned into really satisfying reveals, thankfully with brief flashbacks to remind me on some of them. And honestly, at this point in time, I think that's all I can really say about this game, at least not without continuing to ramble on more specifically about stuff. Like, I know I've missed some things. There's like the gold saucer for your casinoing addictions. You can hunt for treasures. There are special quest lines in regards to some of the beast tribes that you normally fight against, but now you could help them resolve their problems. There's a PvP mode, though I don't really enjoy it all that much, and just so much more. This game is just massive. We've literally traveled all over the continent. We've traveled across the seas. We traveled into the stars. We traveled through dimensions. We traveled to the literal ends of the universe. You'd almost think that that's it for the game story, but the game itself even sets up even more for us to try and look forward to for upcoming adventures, and that's something I can't wait to see, even as a little bit dumb I am when it comes to the story, and that's something I can't wait to continue exploring. I'm looking at the timer on this thing, and I feel like I probably need to stop talking. So anyways, if there's ever anything you guys want me to talk about more in depth, even though this is quite in depth enough, say for job mechanics or whatever, let me know. Maybe I'll talk more about it, but I feel like this might be the most definitive video I can make about this whole thing. And yeah, that's all I can say. So thank you all so much for watching. If you like what you saw, you can click right up here to check out some of my other videos that I've done, or if you really feel like it, you can click right up there to subscribe. And until next time, guys, I will see you all later.